Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alfred Hitchcock, and welcome to Kinotherapy. My name is Alfred Hitchcock. Oh, I already said that. I bet you are wondering where Gordon Morgan's is. Well, I, the great Alfred Hitchcock, have transformed my body into Gordon's. I can do that. I apologise if some of you have anywhere to be in the next few hours. This is the fastest I can talk. I am very excited about today's episode. We are covering one of the most famous directors of all time. One of the most creative and sexiest directors of all time. That being me, Alfred Hitchcock. That is who I am. Therefore, I have come back from the dead to possess Gordon Morgan's, and I will drop him off at the nearest bus stop once I am done using him. I do wish he would brush his teeth more often. I was really hoping to come back in a better vessel than this. Anywho, let's continue with our episode of Kinotherapy. Gordon Morgan's here. Welcome back to Kinotherapy, everyone. In my first video on Akira Kurosawa, I mentioned that I would mainly be covering foreign filmmakers. So I just want everyone to know that this next director, who directed many American films, is actually British. So it still counts. Besides, there's one director who every movie lover should know. A director with a great mind for storytelling and an eye for the camera to bring those stories to life. The master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. A massive name in Hollywood and movies worldwide, he influenced nearly every director since his reign. Films imitating the director's rhythm are dubbed Hitchcockian in honor of him. In a way, a verbal storyteller or a writer will use words to put the reader into the moment. Hitchcock used the camera to absorb the audience. The visuals always came first in his films. Sure, he had dialogue and music, but Hitchcock always asked himself, how can I get the audience fully engaged into the picture? How can I communicate this information? How can I express this idea without using any dialogue? How can I make this scene absolutely terrifying? So terrifying that it messes with the audience's head. Hitchcock knew the benefit that cinema had over plays or novels, and he used it to his advantage as much as possible. Hitchcock is great not just because of the stories he told, but the way he told them. It was his ability to weave a tale, to keep the audience on board from when the lights go down to when the credits roll. Pushing technical advancements with his subsequent works, reasons like this are why Alfred Hitchcock is sometimes considered the greatest director of all time. Hitchcock himself became somewhat of a star, with his cameo appearances and hosting his own TV show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He became one of the most recognizable directors to audiences. His image often consisted of him talking of a macabre or morbid subject matter, with a deadpan yet gentlemanly demeanor, which added a great sense of gallows humor to Hitchcock's legacy.
But I've just come into possession of a cure for insomnia. It comes in capsule form. For best results, they must be taken internally. I've heard of a leg of lamb, a leg of chicken, but never a leg of potatoes. But I'm Alfred Hitchcock. I can prove it.
Sure, everybody is.
I insist. It is an amazingly simple device. An idiot can operate it, and indeed many do.
This shows that as dark as Hitchcock films can get, they can be fun too. In fact, sometimes the characters in his films would discuss crime novels or murder stories in an enticing and sickly preoccupying way, almost like they're the audience members being voyeurs. Hitchcock loved to subvert expectations, making the thrills more shocking and the story less predictable. Casting unusual choices to look inconspicuous in the roles, most notably blonde-haired women as femme fatales. The lighter hair gives off a more innocent aura than classic brunettes. Hitchcock worked with many famous actors, his most popular collaborations being that of James Stewart, Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Grace Kelly. Now, Hitchcock directed over 50 films, so obviously I'm not going to talk about most of them, but I'm going to highlight the special moments in his career and briefly mention some periods in his time. But what makes Hitchcock's films appeal to both audiences and film lovers? How does he balance these thrilling yet psychological tones? Why are his films still considered some of the most exciting and nail-biting pictures ever made? Sit back and find out what makes Alfred Hitchcock a legend of cinema. Alfred Hitchcock was born on August 13, 1899, in the outskirts of London. He was brought up by strict Catholic parents who had a knack for cruel punishments. His mother would make him stand at the end of her bed for hours. The priests at his school used hard rubber canes that beat the children. On another instance, his father sent him to the police station with a note. It instructed the policemen to lock up young Alfred, for he's been a very naughty boy. And they actually did. Hitchcock said this is where he first developed his sense of fear. This didn't help young Hitchcock's social life either. He was an unpopular child, being bullied for his weight, and didn't have many friends. As he grew older, however, he started going to the cinemas more and more. This newfound love of his inspired him to take a job designing title cards for movies. It's evident to say that this helped him gain an eye for visuals, and considered this to be a very important component of film. Like many other directors, he started off as an assistant director for a few years, and I should mention this is where he met his wife, Alma Revell, a screenwriter who collaborated on many of his productions. After a few years in the business, the opportunity to direct finally came to him. It only took Hitchcock till his third film to establish his voice audiences would come to know. During the director's silent era, he made one of Britain's most suspenseful classics. The Lodger is based on the novel by Mary Belloc Lowndes, and is in turn inspired by the real-life killings of Jack the Ripper. The first thing that audiences noticed were of course the visuals. Already, Hitchcock was pushing creative techniques, like the pleasantly designed title cards. They don't look like typical slides, and are instead colorful, with nice patterns. And the camera work makes the events feel more dynamic. Certain angles bring us closer to the characters. Despite us being scared, we vividly connect with our strange lodger. The film is rather a small-scale mystery in which a mysterious new lodger comes to stay in the Bunting family's house. In the midst of the recent killings, doubts and suspicions rise as the family starts to suspect that this new guest might be the murderer. This theme of mistaken or unknown identity is a common theme that Hitchcock would often use, and the former is what keeps this an entertaining film. Over time, you start to follow the lodger, whether you suspect him or not, and strangely want him to get out of it. Yet at the same time, there's a positive chance that he may in fact be the killer. Both these elements at play is what really draws you in. It's how Hitchcock engages you in this thriller, rather than have you just be the viewer. He makes you question your own intuitions during the film. A great first watch for Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock made a few more silent films, such as the comedy Champagne, before turning to sound films. In fact, his film Blackmail, released in 1929, was the first British talkie. For that, it's seen as a landmark, and as a pretty good one. Some of the technical stuff hasn't aged well, as many of the first talkies don't necessarily, but it has a surprisingly risque plot point, and manages to be quite tense by the end. Soon, however, Hitchcock released 6 films in 2 years, and the hurriedness of it shows. In an era when the studio should have taken their time to experiment and master the art of sound, instead they just pumped out as many products as they could. The worst of these that I've seen has to be The Skin Game, perhaps Alfred Hitchcock's worst film. It's boring, lacks any style, suspense, or surprise. The ending is supposed to be this big shock, and it just leaves you unmoved. And Hitch hadn't yet developed his little as possible dialogue theory yet, because that's all that happens in this movie. I do not recommend this, even for Hitchcock fans. If you're a completist, then maybe, but just avoid these movies and you'll have a better view on Hitchcock. Luckily for him, this period didn't last long, and Hitchcock got back on the path to make his movies better and better. Trains are an obsession with Hitchcock, and he seems to have handed that down throughout the years, as many people now associate trains as great settings for mysteries. The Lady Vanishes is an Agatha Christie-like caper full of different colorful characters, all with quirks, past, and motivations. The film centers on a lady who, you guessed it, vanishes. While her companion on the train is insistent that she was there, the other passengers seem to deny a woman ever being present. The hunt that ensues is a frustrating experience to our protagonist, but an exciting one for us. Clues seem to lead nowhere, and passengers change stories and sides with the blink of an eye. It's hard to review a mystery film, as I don't want to spoil too much. Hitchcock was very adamant about surprises. But I love all these characters, and I love how you're never sure who's who all throughout the film, who might be in on it, and who's just naive. It all concludes in a satisfying and enthralling ending. It's one of Hitchcock's most successful British films, so check it out and figure out why The Lady Vanished. Alfred Hitchcock made his first American film with this venture, and what a debut! Rebecca is a glorious film, and perhaps the first entry into the psychological drama genre. The film centers on an unnamed woman, played by Joan Fontaine, who marries a rich widower, Max de Winter, played by acting legend Laurence Olivier. While giddy at first, Mrs. de Winter soon finds herself figuratively haunted by Max's late wife, Rebecca, and she doesn't seem dead to those of the house. The head maidservant, Mrs. Danvers, was very close to the late Mrs. de Winter, and treats the new one quite coldly, while Mr. de Winter can lose his temper at times, being reminded of his late wife. The inner turmoils of Mrs. de Winter are what churn tensions in this Hitchcock classic. A psychological film in the traditional sense, as we explore the inner emotions through Fontaine's excellent performance. She's a very well-rounded character, innocent, kind, but slightly naive. We see emotions wrought out of her in certain scenes, and even changes start to occur toward the film's closing when she feels it necessary. This is perhaps one of Hitchcock's best characters he ever directed, not to ignore Olivier's outstanding playing as well. He loves his wife, but is tortured by his past, which can cause sudden rises of fury. Despite them never coming off as unlikable or forced, you can't help but feel there's something the elegant Max de Winter is hiding. Elements of both thriller and drama, one thing is constantly present throughout, and that's madness. Subtle, psychological, glamorously disguised madness. The whole film seems to be toying with Miss de Winter, and you feel bad for her, as the woman tries to keep a level head in a house that seems to despise her. Fontaine's character doesn't even get a name until she's married, implying that maybe all along she was no one important but a replacement. Is she merely living in the shadow of a woman better than her? Did Max marry her only to fill the lonely void inside of him? Rebecca is a Hollywood drama with a dark edge to it, and has resonated deeply with audiences. Rebecca won Best Picture that award season, the only Hitchcock film to do so, and the success meant that the British director was here to stay for a long time. Rebecca is one of Hitchcock's best films, and you have to see it on your Hitchcock exploration. Up next is what Hitchcock called his favorite film of his. And while it's not my personal favorite, I love it and find it a great thriller. The beloved Uncle Charlie comes to visit his sister and her family. All are excited, especially his niece Charlie, yes they're both named Charlie, who has a close relationship with him. Soon the young Charlie hears from a detective that her uncle might be a murderer the police are after. Similar to The Lodger in a way, and staying in bounds of Hitchcock's knack for mistaken identity, Shadow of a Doubt certainly keeps you on your toes throughout this thriller. I love characters that really make you think about good and evil, and I feel like the best thrillers do that well, especially in the case of Uncle Charlie, played by Joseph Cotten. He comes off as a very innocent and likable guy, but perhaps that only raises more suspicions. Acts like this seem evident nowadays, but not so much back in the 40s. However, Hitchcock knew that and used Cotten's misleading face to keep audiences guessing. The other strong dynamic of this film is the relationship between Uncle Charlie and young Charlie, played by Teresa Wright. What starts off as a childlike bond soon disintegrates into fear and intimidation. So much so that young Charlie is ready to fend for her life. Just the thought of this man staying in her house terrifies her, but crushes her knowing how she used to love her uncle so much. The final act of the film seems to change things abruptly, which might set some people off. While it definitely stuck out to me, I still found myself engaged in the plight. For as long as a film can catch you in the first act and still has good elements, small flaws are easy to overlook, and the experience of the film will still have its hold on you. I especially love the side characters, such as the young sister Anne, the precocious bookworm, and Charlie's father and his friend Herbie, two crime fiction buffs who discuss murder plans for how they would kill the other. The duo's conversations are a great example of Hitchcock's voyeurism, and just how he makes some of the characters almost as sick as the audience. Herbie has a nice arc, however, when in the end, he doesn't murder, but saves someone in a revealing redemption. Shadow of a Doubt is one of Hitchcock's finest thrillers, full of second guesses, heartbreaking revelations, and overflowing with suspense and unpredictability. You're never sure where Hitchcock will take you, and you'll enjoy being bumped around the whole ride. There's no doubt about that. I'll admit, this may not be Hitchcock's strongest film. It's got two great leads, an interesting premise, There's some good symbols and psychological imagery as well, but at the same time, some of the dialogue scenes are a little stilted, even for classic Hollywood. The characters aren't as nuanced as they could have been, being mainly just kinda bland. So why am I talking about this film then? Salvador Dali. There's a beautiful dream sequence in this film during a psychoanalysis scene, and Alfred Hitchcock actually teamed up with a Spanish painter to help him create a surreal but Freudian dreamscape. As a massive admirer of Dali's work, I immediately checked this out and wasn't disappointed with Dali's contribution. I wasn't disappointed with the rest of the film either, just looking back on it, I don't feel like it was Hitchcock's best. Apart from the dream sequence, there's still some good cinematography, particularly in the last scene, and like I said, some recurring symbols are cleverly shown. I do recommend this film, especially if you're a Salvador Dali fan, but if you're not, check it out anyway. It's a good psychological thriller, just maybe not for your first Hitchcock. Hitchcock's very next effort showed his talents were only improving, in what I think is one of the master's greatest films. Notorious stars Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant, two of Hitchcock's most favorite actors to work with, in stellar performances. The plot is an espionage story about a woman sent by the FBI to seduce the leader of a secret Nazi society, Alex Sebastian, played by Claude Rains. Notorious is a romance film disguised as a thriller. Because as engaged as I was, I didn't feel nervous that often, I more just felt sympathy for the characters. Notorious brings us not one, but two famous Hitchcock moments. The first being an enigmatic long take, starting from a second story and zooming in on a key in Bergman's hand. The camera going from wide to close-up, capturing the scene, then directing your eye to the key plot point. The other is a famous kiss scene, which is a bigger deal than it sounds, and is pretty funny too. You see, back then, Hollywood movies had to follow the Hays Code, a set of rules and regulations of what could and couldn't be shown in pictures. In other words, censorship. All the best directors hated censorship, and were always eager to find clever ways around it, including yours truly. One of the rules is that a kiss can't last more than 3 seconds. Yeah, kissing was too much for those in the 40s. 4 seconds and the army wives faint. Hitchcock managed to make a scene in which Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman would peck for a second or two, and then pull away. They did this again and again, resulting in a kiss scene that lasts almost 3 minutes long. Suck that, you old dated system. Aside from our two leads, Claude Rains is excellent as the antagonist. The film humanizes a villainous character in a tragic but sympathetic way that makes you question who really was the bad guy here. The Nazi is full of passionate affection for his wife, while the FBI puts her life in danger for their own gains. Cary Grant is reluctant, while Sebastian is eager. It's so interesting to see love and trust bring about a villain's downfall, and this is what makes Notorious fascinating. A psychological study as well as a passionate drama and sneaky spy movie. This is also one of the first instances of one of Hitchcock's recurring motifs of mothers. Hitchcock had a rather strange relationship with his controlling mother, which gave him mixed feelings on her. He expressed this numerous times, and the first time it was blatantly noticeable is here. Rains' character has a mother who manipulates him and feeds him bad ideas. Despite his love for his wife, he will always be more loyal to his deceitful mother. An exciting play of love, characters, betrayals, and the blurred concepts of love and evil. This is why Notorious is just amazing. This was Hitchcock's first film shot in color, and his first film to star the one and only James Stewart, who would later appear in the director's greatest achievements. But that's not all Rope has to offer. The film was shot with multiple long takes, which were then seamlessly stitched together in editing, to make it all look like the film was shot in one take. There have been plenty of films since that have used this technique, but in 1948, this was unheard of and a heavily ambitious feat. Based on the play of the same name, Hitchcock tried to keep the real-time feeling of theater and combine it with the focus and camera work of cinema. He would hold on a still object as characters spoke, and then start the next take right where he left off. The film opens with two intellectuals strangling their classmate and hiding him in a chest. Then they have a party, which sounds like a really stupid idea, but that plays into the themes of the film. Brandon and Philip want to commit the perfect murder and prove their intellectual superiority. Having the victim's loved ones around seems like an obvious thing to avoid, but if they pass it off with no suspicion, then they truly have succeeded. Most of the film isn't exactly thrilling, but consists of philosophical conversations about morality, death, and of course, murder. Again, this is a shining example of Hitchcock's voyeurism. The two men only kill as a ruse, with little remorse, the dialogue consisting of the art of murder, while their kin's body is lying right by them. It all stemmed from Professor Rupert Cadell's discussion, which he inadvertently inspired the two snobs to commit the act. James Stewart excellently portrays the arc of this character, as he becomes the only guest suspicious of what might have happened. His curiosity only brings him terror and regret. In addition to the philosophical parts, there's some aristocratic satire present as well. It's easy for these people to sit high in their penthouses and talk about heinous acts like it was just baking bread. But suddenly when they come face to face with the reality lying right under their nose the whole time, their world collapses. It's one of Hitchcock's darkest and even cynical films, but it isn't too negative. I think Rope is one of Hitchcock's most fascinating films, so check it out. Yet another solid and chilling thriller from the master of suspense. It's not exactly his most groundbreaking film, but it does everything it needs to do right. The film centers on a tennis player, Guy Haynes, who meets a peculiar man by the name of Bruno Antony on a train. Bruno suggests that the two of them concoct a murder pact and kill a bothersome figure in the other's life. That way, there's little evidence to connect the victims. Guy immediately rejects this. However, Bruno doesn't seem to understand this. What precedes is a menacing stalker harassing the private life of the tennis player until Bruno gets what he wants. Robert Walker gives a chilling performance as this demented psychopath. A megalomaniac who will terrify all in order to get what he wants. The film continues Hitchcock's tropes, like trains, but even more so explores the themes of death and evil in the human soul. Sure, Guy doesn't want to hurt his ex-wife, but the anger inside of him boils into hatred, and the more this psychopath invades his life, the more paranoid he becomes. It's a film basically saying all people are capable of such evil things, but what makes us good is the decision not to do them. It all amounts to a bombastic climax on the carousel. Personally, I find this scene kind of ridiculous and corny, but many viewers would beg to differ, so don't take my word for it. If Hitchcockian thrillers are becoming your thing, then don't miss Strangers on a Train. Another film based on the play, Dial M for Murder is the first film of Hitchcock's to star Grace Kelly. She plays a woman torn between two men, a lover and her husband. When the latter finds out about the two, he plans an elaborate scheme to murder his wife in an act of revenge. As the film goes on, things go wrong, and the whole situation spirals more and more out of control, causing mayhem for everyone involved. Calling this film a mystery isn't the proper genre, since we know what happens, but seeing the mind of this psychopath work is fascinating and entertaining to watch. It's like a crime novel, but we're from the point of view of the killer this time, seeing every little detail, all the carefully planned out steps and precautions, and honestly, it's fun to see. Much like Rope, the film takes place in one room, not the last time Hitchcock would use this technique, but it's not done in real time. Instead, we're stuck here, forced to see all moments and emotions stirred up in this home. When we're relegated to one set location, we see the sides of everyone involved. Nothing is hidden or obstructed. Hitchcock was finally getting used to color around this time too. The color red is splattered on the walls of the apartment, like our characters are living in danger, and the use of shadows is impeccably effective too. In addition, there's a great scene in which a character dials a rotary phone, or for the 50s, I guess it's just phone, and it shows the fingers through the holes. In order to pull this off, Hitchcock made a giant wooden model and filmed fake fingers dialing a huge telephone. Good, just isn't good enough for old Hitch. Dial M for Murder is a tightly written, intricate, and flourishing thriller that will have you on the edge of your seat, begging to know what will happen next. We are now entering a new age of Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock had already made some great stuff, but if you thought that was great, these are the films that made him legendary. These are not great films. Coming up are bona fide masterpieces of Hollywood thrillers. Tales of mystery and murder have never been as good as these works. They have only wished they could be. Now with that said, here is perhaps Alfred Hitchcock's third best movie. Rear Window is set once again in a solitary space, a man's apartment, but it's not so much his apartment in which the story takes place, but the backlot of his building, the view outside his rear window. After breaking his leg in a photography accident, Jeff, played by James Stewart, is bedridden, and to occupy his time, takes a peeping on his neighbors. There's a newlywed couple, a dancer, a piano player, and a lonely woman among some of the occupants. One day, Jeff starts to suspect that one of his neighbors murdered their wife. Should Jeff believe his eyes, or is he seeing too much of the residents' personal lives? This is the ultimate example of Hitchcock's voyeuristic theme. Voyeurism is a word traditionally defining sexual pleasure from viewing intimate acts, but the word has been stretched to a more broad meaning over time. But what it all comes down to is man is a pervert. Our protagonist is bored, therefore takes to watching people for his leisure. This can be likened to films, and that we are sort of peeping toms as well, watching the lives of strangers. We love the drama and the struggles of these people, as it gives us entertainment, but when applied to a reality, there's a strange sickness to it. But then we understand Stewart's character, and eventually are hooked with him in exposing this murder. It's exciting and makes us feel amused and important. In addition to this, James Stewart is in a wheelchair the whole time. A very limited and challenging project, but the best artists know that limitations can sometimes cause the greatest strengths. Hitchcock brilliantly puts us in the position of a man sitting down in one location, just like the viewer looking through a screen at the dangers and thrills of life through a lens. It's this talent that makes Hitchcock the best at what he does, to put the audience in the protagonist's shoes in such a brilliant and thought-provoking way. One that is both fun, but provokes us as well. The best art serves to entertain and to educate, and Rear Window does both. A nail-biting thriller, but a fascinating study on the psychology of men and daily perversions. It's one of Alfred Hitchcock's greatest achievements, so don't miss it. The next time around, Alfred Hitchcock actually remade one of his own films, and I think it's quite an improvement. I enjoyed the 1930s The Man Who Knew Too Much, but Hitchcock clearly had some better ideas and wanted an update, and I like what he did. James Stewart stars once again as a man on vacation with his wife and son, when suddenly the family accidentally gets caught up in an international conspiracy. Stewart's ability to play an everyman is exactly what Hitchcock wanted. He wanted the audience to relate to the main characters, and rather than have them be cool, suave, or tough guys, he made his protagonists realistic people. Average Joes who get mixed up in something by mistake. That way, it's easier for us to accept and get wrapped up in the sudden crisis they must deal with, as well as sympathize with this problem that fell into their life. And James Stewart is the perfect actor for this role. This also plays into Hitchcock's common trope of mistaken identity, or normal people being thrust into volatile plots. Stewart only wants to keep his family safe, and he's often level-headed, but he has his reasonable moments of desperation and frustration. This film is Hitchcock's best use of music in any of his work, I have to say. It's amazing. There's a scene at the church which sets up a tense atmosphere. Then we get the most memorable portion, a lengthy, bombastic scene at the Royal Albert Hall, accompanied by a grand orchestra. Finally, at the end, we get the recurring song, Qui Sera, Sera, sung by Doris Day, which made its first appearance in this movie. That's right, the famous Qui Sera, Sera debuted in The Man Who Knew Too Much. This song eloquently sets the mood and connects the emotional state with the events around her. And finally, the very last shot is just perfect. I'm not going to spoil any of this, but it's such a charming way to end the film. This is the most fun I've had watching a Hitchcock film in a while. It's superbly shot, marvelously acted, excellent music, all covered in suspense and excitement. If you thought Rear Window was great, Vertigo is even better. This is the kind of film where I don't know what to start off with. I don't know how much I should talk about without ruining the experience. It is the film Hitchcock has been working his whole career for, a psychological mystery masterpiece. James Stewart returns as a retired detective with acrophobia. He's asked by a friend to follow his wife as she begins showing signs of strange behavior. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot. James Stewart gives one of his most famous performances here as well. After Stewart returned from serving in World War II, many noted that his roles became darker, which I slightly disagree with. His characters in Hitchcock films, for instance, were similar to those of his Frank Capra personas. They were just put in different situations. This is exactly why it works so well. Again, Hitchcock wanted to play with our expectations. He wanted us to be surprised, and surprise is definitely what audiences got. Seeing George Bailey dangle from a rooftop not only shocks any doubters, but makes us feel more sympathy for the poor man. But of course, we have to give credit to James Stewart himself for being able to pull it off. He's been compared to Tom Hanks in recent years, which I suppose is fair enough. He has an archetype, a boyish, everyman charm, yet he has range too. He's played the naive Jefferson Smith to the perverse, womanizing photographer Jeff. From the delightful George Bailey finding hope to the tortured John Scotty Ferguson losing it all. Gun-toting cowboys or cheerful young men, his range and control was like no other, and is why James Stewart is my favorite actor. Anyway, this video was supposed to be about Alfred Hitchcock.
What? Oh, come on.
The visuals here are to die for. There's so many great styles and frames, making it Hitchcock's most visually stunning film in my eyes. Scenes are flourishing with color, which not only looks nice, but is symbolic too. The color green is the most common color appearing, giving off a hazy and altered look at a plot that gets more and more confusing. I also love the moment where Scotty first lays eyes on Madeline against a red wall. It plays on the dual meaning of the color, indicating a temptation, but also flashing danger, foreshadowing the complex emotions Scotty will go up against. In addition, Hitchcock's use of the camera as the eye is unmatched here. It's mostly done in subtle ways, like most of his films, when a character watches another character walk by, or follows something our protagonist is watching. Perhaps a good example is when Scotty notices an important detail and the camera closes in on it. But the best example of this would have to be the dolly zoom, otherwise known as the Vertigo effect. A technique in which the camera zooms in or out, and the camera itself moves the opposite way, giving one of the most nauseating, disoriented camera effects of all time. And to top it all off, this was the first film to use this technique. The idea was first conceived by cameraman Erman Roberts, who inspired Hitchcock to put it to use. If you've seen this done before in any other movie or show, just remember that Alfred Hitchcock and Erman Roberts invented it. We're also given a couple long silent scenes meant to quietly observe what Scotty is seeing. Additionally, the shadows are stark and deceptive. I especially love this shot of Judy, one side of her face concealed in darkness, while the other glowing green and opaque. But it doesn't end there, as we get some dazzling psychedelic sequences, notably the opening credits, created by renowned title sequence creator Saul Bass, a man whose career and reputation is successful just for how good he was at doing these credit scenes. My favorite scene in the whole film, though, is Scotty's nightmare. Hitchcock goes completely experimental and abstract with this eerie but beautiful sequence. This is why I love visual art. Representation of emotions through colors, camera work, or any kind of visual styles. This is why I love cinema. Scotty's hysteria has given him a fever. His head can't handle this anymore and creates a beautiful nightmare to cope with it. This scene perfectly represents the insanity growing in his brain. Seamless editing, stark shadows, frightening symbols, vibrant lights, flashing colors, and metaphorical motifs. It's a scene, a story told in nothing but silent yet expressive dream logic. Hitchcock has never made anything like this before or after. Saul Bass not only helped make this sequence as well, but he was a visual consultant for Hitchcock. So much of the colors in here can be given credit to him. And that's still not all. The psychological themes explored here are varied from gender roles, fear, but most of all, obsession. Scotty keeps trying to make things better and better. He soon becomes a little selfish, but it's understandable. His mind is being played by those unbeknownst to him, and it drives him more and more crazier. It's a perfect mystery film. There's so much to unpack. Deep, complex characters, breathtaking cinematography, and insane psychological revelations. The film is carried by the mental torment of Scotty, being led down paths of doubt and wonder. Can he believe what he's seeing, or his trauma made him insane? You'll have to find out by watching what many say is Alfred Hitchcock's greatest achievement. That claim is debated with another Hitchcock film, which we'll talk about soon. Vertigo has even beaten out Citizen Kane as the #1 greatest movie of all time by BFA. I wouldn't call it the #1 greatest of all time though, as that's a tough honor, but it is perhaps the best at what it tries to do. I maybe don't recommend starting out with this one, but get to it as soon as you can. Devote your life goal to watching Vertigo. You'll thank me later. With Vertigo being one of Hitchcock's darkest films, he wanted to follow up with a fun one, which led him to North by Northwest. A great combination of an adventure spy thriller, and was at one point my favorite Hitchcock film. Cary Grant is a perfect lead role for this, embodying a smooth, easygoing man with touches of humor and sarcastic quips. Yet is a skilled enough actor to carry the emotional and suspenseful scenes seriously and convincingly. North by Northwest follows Roger Thornhill in a mistaken identity plot. An everyday man accidentally caught up in a grand scheme is no distant niche to Hitchcock, but this is the one that does it the best. The film perfectly balances these two tones, as while you're always in suspense, always wondering what will happen next, you're always entertained. Nobody is what they seems, and Thornhill must trust no one. Which gets a little tricky when he meets the sexy Eva Marie Saint. This film also introduced the MacGuffin, a special object in the film in which all the characters are trying to obtain. It can be crucial to the plot, or just something to move it along. In this case, it's a statue containing microfilm. It's what all the characters are after, yet that's not what we enjoy about North by Northwest. We love seeing the adventure, the near-miss escapes, the daring stunts, the excitement, the twists. That is what makes this film so engaging. But the MacGuffin helps to move it along. And it wouldn't be possible without our lead. A normal, down-to-earth guy thrust into an unusual situation. That's what makes us relate, feel, and root for him. He's not James Bond, he's not someone we want to be, he's one of us. And this was Hitchcock's secret. Subverting the audience expectations by making things more exciting but more familiar all at once. The climax is one of the most exciting scenes Hitchcock has ever filmed, and there's some really impressive effects. But the most famous scene is that of the crop duster, a plane flying so low it nearly chops Cary Grant's head off. One of the most heart-stopping moments in cinema, and one of the most heart-pounding movies ever made. On the edge of your seat, tongue-in-cheek, and having a good time, North by Northwest's fun and thrilling tone makes it one of his most remembered films in Hitchcock's career. Let me first say this. If you know absolutely nothing about Psycho, what it's about, why it's so famous, then good. Keep it that way. The less you know about Psycho before watching it, the better. So much of what makes the experience of Psycho are all the surprises, the toying with your expectations. What Hitchcock does with the narrative here is genius and had never been done before like that. In addition, there's at least 2 great twists in this movie. I'm going to avoid talking about the plot as much as I can, while still trying to sell you on this movie. But you can take others' words for it, because Psycho is commonly regarded as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Saul Bass returns for a memorable opening title shot, and Bernard Herrmann composes one of the most iconic scary themes in movies, literally titled Murder. Hitchcock's visuals become unmatched here, and he has mastered the behavior of the human eye exquisitely. The way a character will just look at something, and you see the terror instantly flare up. There's so many little details and motifs to notice in the shots. The scenes can tell you so much about the motivations with so little, and all you need is a little fluency in film language. But you can just enjoy the film on a first run. A character will interact with certain objects in minute ways, or walk in front of the camera to obstruct your view of this true nature. Which doesn't sound subtle, but trust me, if you blink, you'll miss it. But the most famous scene I have to bring up is the shower scene. One of the most famous scenes in cinema history for its breakneck editing, brilliant match cuts, daring cinematography, and tons of POV shots as well, to really put the killer in the audience's mind. The harsh white wall clashing with the black shadows makes the deed pop out more. And just considering all the camera angles, positions, movements, zooms, the immense work that went into making a frantic and hectic montage. The scene took 6 days to shoot and used over 70 different camera angles. A scene that's so famous that it made people afraid of showers, just like Jaws made people afraid of the ocean. Or The Visit made people afraid of grandparents. Wait, nobody was scared of that. I've seen this movie quite a few times, and every time it gets to the shower scene, I'm just left in awe. I'm expecting it, but I'm still blown away. It will always amaze me. It's true movie magic in the best way. Psycho was also one of the first movies to move away from the loosening grip of the Hays Code. It may not seem too controversial nowadays, but still made a few splashes, with its violence, sexual references, partial nudity, and even references to transvestites. But forget that, this is the first movie to show a toilet flushing. People in the 60s didn't use toilets, that's gross. The film mainly covers the themes of psychosexuality in a way that would make Freud proud. It's not very explicit, but its subtlety actually helps the film in my opinion. It's much better to pick up on these things yourself and enjoy the film on your own subjective experience than have the film spoon-feed you brain lectures. Anthony Perkins is just fantastic as the character of Norman Bates. Again, I don't want to say much, but there's something so mysterious about Bates, and his character is a mystery itself all throughout the film. Perkins does a great job capturing this anxiety and shadiness, and is intriguing to watch in every scene. Not just for the performance, but for trying to figure out what's wrong with this guy. Some say that Psycho is Alfred Hitchcock's greatest film he's ever made. Not everyone agrees with that, of course, as many will say that Vertigo is his best film. I find it a little difficult to choose, but if I had to, I think I'd go with Vertigo. Psycho is a great horror movie and goes above and beyond at that, but Vertigo is more of a fluctuating movie. There's drama, mystery, suspense, romance. Psycho is terrifying, but Vertigo is also heartbreaking. Not saying that Psycho should have a gut-punching side to it, because to add one would probably make the film worse, but this is a debate on what Hitchcock's greatest film is. But like that matters when your 2 best films are Psycho and Vertigo. Trust me when I say Psycho lives up to the hype. Prepare yourselves for something different but amazing. Hurry up and watch Psycho. Hitchcock continues down the horror path with what was also my favorite Hitchcock at one point. I really loved monster movies as a kid, so the thought of Hitchcock doing one was too good to pass on. The Birds has some great effects and gory moments, and Hitchcock brings in some tedious but rewarding scenes that expertly build suspense. The film centers on the town trying to deal with the events and figure out why birds are attacking them in this area. What happens when humanity is faced with a crisis that has no knowledge or preparations on how to handle it? No reasons, no motivations, no solutions, absolutely lost and hopeless. Some of my favorite Hitchcock scenes are in this film, the penultimate one being a grand reveal at a schoolyard playground. It slowly builds tension in a way that you don't even notice and hits just at the right moment. This is a perfect example of why I love patient scenes. It's brilliant. Hitchcock really adapted to more special effects for this film, getting puppets, animatronics, and real birds for some of the shots. Not to mention there's great use of matte paintings and layers, combining reality with the aforementioned ornithologic models. Not everyone seems to like this one as much as I do. Some scenes don't make a lot of sense and feel contrived, I'll admit. And many prefer Hitchcock's mysteries rather than straight up violence. As you can imagine, I disagree with that, and think the film offers us much more than just violent images. The Hitchcock touch is embedded in many scenes, and you still get a sense like you're there in the epidemic. Or should I say, the birdemic. Some have also criticized Tippi Hedren's performance as not being great. I think she's fine, but not amazing. And speaking of Hedren, maybe I should bring up the elephant-sized crow in the room. I wanted to focus on Hitchcock's work alone, but to the extent of how much I'm praising him and building up to you guys, you have a right to know. So, during the filming of The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock became sexually infatuated with model actress Tippi Hedren. He followed her, whispered dirty phrases in her ear, even had her handwriting analyzed. She refused his advances because he's married and a 60-year-old overweight British man. Therefore, during a scene in which Hedren is bombarded with birds, Hitchcock decided to use real birds in replacement of the pre-planned puppets, as punishment for not accepting his advances. She was badly scarred and damaged, and had a breakdown after her eyelid was sliced, un chien andalou style. Tippi Hedren was left lying on the floor in tears and trauma after the scene, with nobody on set offering their help. Tippi Hedren has spoken out about this abuse she endured many times at live panels and interviews, which I suppose is the silver lining to this. But nonetheless, as much as I love Alfred Hitchcock, this was no doubt a disgusting thing to do and inexcusable. I was also debating this because if I talk about Alfred Hitchcock's sexual misconduct, then I gotta talk about every other director's sexual misconduct, because unfortunately this won't be the last time. Burden of a movie lover. But this is a good time to bring up the idea of separating the art from the artist. That if an artist's work is still good, you can still enjoy it, even if that director is a piece of shit. Not everyone agrees with this mindset, and that's fine. You shouldn't have to watch anything you feel uncomfortable watching. Hitchcock's films are pretty much essential to cinema, but you shouldn't feel forced to watch anything. Even if you're unsure, I do recommend trying to separate the art from the artist. Personally, if their work is still good, I usually still tend to enjoy it, but of course there are bigger issues at hand here. So you should not feel obligated in any way. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on. Beginning in the late 60s, Hitchcock's films were decreasing in quality and sales. Marnie was good, but not successful enough. He tried returning to the spy genre with films such as Torn Curtain and Topaz. But unfortunately these weren't great films, and were just clunky imitations of his previous works. Finally, in 1972, Alfred Hitchcock seemed to make a return to form. The director went R-rated for this one, in a killer mystery that I still don't like very much. Yeah, sorry, as many said this with Hitchcock's comeback and his best in a long time, I still had trouble getting invested in it. Frenzy is about a serial killer who kills young women with neckties, known as the Necktie Murderer. The film isn't a good mystery because the killer is revealed early on, and it's not a great psychological film as we don't learn much of anything about our necktie murderer. What the film actually centers on, though, is a man wrongfully accused of being the necktie murderer, and his attempts to run from the law. I would have said he tries to solve the real mystery at hand, except he doesn't, which makes him one of Hitchcock's weakest protagonists in my opinion. He's a very selfish and unlikable human being who wants nothing to do with the whole fiasco and simply tries to flee. Sure, other Hitchcock protagonists have been selfish, but they have respectable qualities as well, and usually try to solve the murder themselves. This man is just kind of a douche. On the plus side, there are some good scenes throughout this. The whole chase premise does manage to be thrilling at times, wondering if the law will catch up with our hero or our villain. There's a suspenseful scene in the back of a potato truck, and an excellent tracking shot in an auspicious moment. The scene involves a hint at something sinister, and the camera pulls back, uncomfortable and helpless. But that's really it. Just this one camera movement that sticks out in an otherwise bland thriller slasher movie. I don't hate this movie, but I recommend you check it out last if you're interested. Many disagree with me, so if you're feeling up to it, go ahead and give it a try. Alfred Hitchcock may not have ended on a high note, but his reputation was growing more and more. Some of his lesser-known films were being re-evaluated and studied in newly established film schools. He was a major influence on the next generation of filmmakers, who all cited him as the greatest. Steven Spielberg's main inspiration for the style and camera techniques of Jaws is giving credit to the master of suspense in cinema. Hitchcock himself even praised Jaws as one of the best movies at the time. In 1979, the Queen of England knighted him, pronouncing him Sir Alfred Hitchcock, one of the highest British honors. On April 29, 1980, Sir Alfred Joseph Hitchcock died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80 years old. No one has been able to make films quite like Hitchcock has. Eventful, frightening, suspenseful, fun, humorous, risque, and daring. To reach inside the audience's subconscious mind and portray on the screen the perfect angle, the right colors, the sheer emotions to make the viewer instantly absorbed in the movie. For placing the human eye in the exact spot it might be if it were a camera. Every choice he made was a brilliant and crucial one to enhance the audience's experience. He didn't want them to just watch the film, he wanted them to be a part of it. He wanted them to be actively engaged, and there's so few directors who do that as expertly as Alfred Hitchcock. And thus concludes my Alfred Hitchcock retrospective. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I hope I recommended you some great films. I hope I opened your mind to the possibilities of cinema. If you like this video, like, subscribe, thumb the bell, leave a comment, let me know what your favorite Alfred Hitchcock film is so far. And share this with your friends so they can start watching Alfred Hitchcock movies too. Also, I should mention I have a Letterboxd account where sometimes I do single reviews of individual movies. So yeah, go ahead and follow me on there and you can see what I'm watching, I can see what you're watching. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. Look forward to more brilliant directors being explored and more Kinotherapy coming soon. Take care.